Hello, Michael Denon here, Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education at UC Irvine. And this is Conversations with the Vice Provost. This is where I sit down with colleagues from around the university and we talk about topics of interest to the university, the wider community, the state, the nation, and dare I say, even the world. And today it's my great pleasure to have with me Distinguished Professor of Philosophy, Duncan Pritchard. Duncan, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Michael.
Well, I'm excited because we've been partnering for a long time on this. And we've been doing the Anteater virtues, which we renamed. Yeah. So I think we need to take a step back.
Yeah.
They're originally called the intellectual virtues.
That's right.
And maybe just give a very little brief. What do we mean intellectual virtues? Because aren't we all virtuous at the at the university?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think hopefully we are, right?
Right. Yeah.
As educators, as academics. But the intellectual virtues, they're these high-level cognitive skills. Things like intellectual humility, intellectual tenacity, intellectual courage, conscientiousness, and so forth. They're admirable character traits. They're geared towards intellectual goods. They're geared towards truth, knowledge, understanding, wisdom. And you find this, the idea that there's something very important about this, you find in many intellectual traditions. You find it in ancient Greece, you find it in Confucian philosophy, you find it in classical Indian philosophy. The idea that there's something particularly good about a person who has these kind of high-level traits, these intellectual virtues, and they're things that help us flourish and help us prosper as people.
Now, you partly answered one of my questions because you mentioned ancient Greece, Confucian. How long, they've been around a long time. Is there a clear moment where within philosophy they got more formalized, or was it always an ongoing process?
Well, they tend to be, I mean, Aristotle gives them the clearest, sophisticated account.
Okay.
So often they're credited to ancient Greece. But as I say, it's interesting that even in ancient Greece, you can see precursors of this idea in North African thought, for example, in Phoenician thought, in ancient Egyptian thought. So arguably they go back even to North Africa, like to the very first civilizations along the Nile. And even more interestingly, these other civilizations, which often, like in Far East, in classical Indian philosophy, which arose independently of ancient Greece, they have very similar ideas. So it seems like it's an idea that we've, as human beings, we've converged on. The thought that there's like an excellence of character, and that's what we should try and promote in people. And this excellence of character helps us to flourish, to prosper.
Now, if I'm just sort of the average person looking at thinking about these, you mentioned a few of them, tenacity. I don't know that we normally think of tenacity as a virtue, but integrity is one that obviously resonates as a virtue. Can you maybe just comment a little bit on when you look at these, how many feel specific to maybe an intellectual exercise and how many feel generic? That's a weird question, but
it's a good one. And in fact, for Aristotle, you can't really, I mean, he thought you couldn't really distinguish the intellectual from the moral and the practical.
Okay.
They're intertwined. So the virtuous person isn't, you couldn't just be virtuous purely intellectually, right? Because like if you're intellectually courageous, you're going to be courageous, right?
Okay.
If you're intellectually humble, you're going to be humble. So as it were, character is holistic. And in fact, we find this, the sort of projects that I've been involved in where we tried to cultivate character, where we tried to cultivate intellectual character specifically, you find you cultivate people's moral character as well. I mean, I'll give you an example of this. I was involved in a prison education project back in Scotland.
Right.
I was formerly professor at the University of Edinburgh. And we had a project, and it was just about trying to help the prisoners. It was a prison education. It was about helping them with their critical thinking skills, helping them to reason well and think more clearly for themselves. Right. So we were just focused on the intellectual ends. But what was interesting about the project was that it changed the way they dealt with each other. At the beginning of the project, everything was very hierarchical. Prison's a very hierarchical place. Right. Some people speak, some people don't, and so on. By the end, and some people are listened to and some people are not. By the end, it became very flat. People were more respectful of each other, more interested in each other, collaborated more. And these are kind of social skills, which I think reveals a kind of moral maturity, which was lacking at the beginning. But we were just focused on the intellectual stuff. But the intellectual stuff actually, I think, has a bearing on character more generally.
Okay, so now you've just triggered a question I've never asked you, we've never talked about. I've always felt certainly in Western universities, certainly in U.S. universities, there's a very strong individual strand. And you just mentioned collaboration. And I felt we've been moving in a more collaborative direction. Certainly you see science becoming more collaborative. We talk about that more at the university. And we see with many of our students, UC Irvine, we're very proud of being first gen serving, Hispanic serving, and understanding students who come from a culture that's more collaborative. Is there a core collaborative element to the intellectual virtues then? And if so, do you want to postulate on how the university became so individualistic? I'm just taking us in a total tangent here, Duncan.
No, that's a great question. I mean, I think you're right. It has become more, in fact, two things go together, I think. It's more individualistic, and students increasingly think of their education instrumentally. It's not a good in itself. It's a means to something else. Like, so they think of it in terms of just grades, getting to the next stage, career, what have you. They don't think of it as something that helps them flourish. And I think you're right, it's individualistic because society is individualistic. So universities reflect that, right? Everything is me-focused. What's interesting about the virtues, though, is that they're what they're called other-regarding. You can't be self-regarding and be virtuous. Like, so think about intellectual humility. Right. You know, you might think intellectual humility is like sort of downgrading yourself or something, but that's not what it is. The virtue of intellectual humility is about being open to other ideas, listening to others, you know, not being dogmatic, being willing to be corrected, you know, being willing to listen to what other people have to say, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable because they disagree with you and so on. Right. So it's not individualistic at all. And the other thing about the virtues is that when you embed them into education, they're the kinds of thing that help you to stop thinking of your education as instrumentally, because the thought is that education done well, as I think we do here at UCI, helps you flourish as a person, helps develop your character. So it has a good, I mean, in the so-called romantic period and afterwards, so late, forgive me, I'm a philosopher, so I can't.
No, that's okay, you got it.
But in the sort of late 1700s, early 1800s, this liberal idea came to the fore, which informed education. It was the idea of education as having a kind of liberatory power. It helps the individual realize their potential, and it respects the dignity of the individual to become the person they can be. So you get these ideas, von Humboldt in Germany, and then later Newman in Britain and Ireland, and then later still Dewey in America, that education has this special value because it's not just about teaching facts and skills. I mean, it is about that, obviously. Right. But more than that, it's about liberating the individual, like teaching them how to think for themselves. Not what to think, but how to think, you know, and that this celebrates the dignity of the individual. And I think that's a really important value. And if we can cultivate that in our education system, then it will help students not to think so individualistically and help to not think so instrumentally about their education.
Well, what I love about that is this idea that cultivating the dignity of the individual makes you realize both your dignity and the other person's dignity.
Exactly. You can't
and that makes you collaborative.
Yeah. You can't cultivate your dignity in isolation, as it were. It's by its nature a social thing. It's other regarding.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's awesome. Now, that goes to what we've sort of done here. So you and I have worked together on this while you started it. I'll give you credit for that. But it's been awesome to be working on the Anteater virtues, which was to pick a few of these and really say, okay, we're going to infuse this into the UC Irvine culture through a lot of different avenues. I think first it would be useful, why those four that we picked? I mean, what was the motivation back then? Maybe remind people of that.
Okay, well, before I get to that, I should say, it's amazing that we got to do this.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, it really is incredible. Like, so I came here like 7 years ago or something like that. And I just happened to have a conversation with the Chancellor about something else, and I mentioned this, and he said, this is a great idea, we should do this. And I was flabbergasted that this is impossible. And then he put me in contact with you, and then you were really enthusiastic too. And, and suddenly, like, all these doors start to open. Yeah. No one's ever done this
That's
before.
The collaborative intellectual virtues that we have.
UCI, I think, is a really interesting place, that it has that culture of pedagogical innovation. Yeah. So we're the first to do this. No one's ever done it. And I think the reason they haven't done it is because usually you just don't have that kind of top-down support. So to try and bring educating for virtuous intellectual character into the heart of an R1 curriculum, never been done. But we're doing it. I mean, it's been done in schools, been done in prisons, been done in lots of other contexts, but not in university. And then, as you say, we pick 4 intellectual virtues. Because you've got there's many intellectual virtues. And so we thought, well, 4 seems like a good number, right? And it's arbitrary, but let's try it. And then ones we went to, we thought would would work particularly well in a higher education context. The first one's curiosity. So curiosity is a virtue. So that doesn't mean just asking random questions.
Right.
It means asking relevant questions. But you need to have curiosity as a virtue. You need to be driven to inquire in order to learn and to, so forth, and to take a joy in learning, right? That virtue's got to be there. So it seems very essential to an educational context. The second was intellectual integrity. So the idea here was that, as academics, we often talk about academic misconduct. It's purely negative,
Right.
Don't do this, don't cheat, don't
Right.
plagiarize, and so on. But we wanted to make it a positive thing. Like, what is it to be? What is the good,
Yes.
intellectual good that we're striving for here? And the thought is something like this. Like, suppose I'm in an argument with someone. I don't just want to win the argument, right? I want to understand where you're coming from. I don't want to misrepresent your position. Maybe I want to charitably understand your position, make your position as strong as possible.
Yeah.
I want to be open about the drawbacks of my own position, because what I care about ultimately is getting to the truth. It's not winning an argument, right? And then the other two, they pair nicely: intellectual humility and intellectual tenacity. As I said before, intellectual humility is this openness to one's fallibility, openness to other ideas, not being dogmatic. And it pairs nicely with intellectual tenacity, because you might think intellectual tenacity is a kind of dogmatism, like just sticking to your guns.
Right, yeah.
But what we try and put them together to get people to see that's not what it is. To be intellectually tenacious doesn't mean that you never give up your opinions no matter what. But it means, like, you don't just give up at the first sign of an obstacle, right? And you don't just give up your learning because it's difficult or whatever.
Yeah.
So they seem to pair quite nicely.
No, I love that combination. A couple of things that we've experienced directly. We immediately leaned into this in our orientation approach. When students come in, to make academic integrity more about the positive, what you should do, versus the negative. And I think it helps students understand that there's nuances to academic integrity. What is not appropriate in one situation may become appropriate, right? I like to use the example, it's not appropriate to buy the solution homeworks or to pay someone to do your homework. But at some point in life, it is appropriate to hire consultants to solve problems for your business, right? And that looks contradictory at the surface, unless you have a deeper understanding of all the issues and integrity and what's going on.
This is going to get more complicated with AI.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is, we're going to do a new module on this, because we feel like there's so much to explore there. Because as a tool, great, but if it's writing your essay for you, then that's not great, right?
That's not great. Yeah. Now, we did this in a couple of different ways, and I think this is what's interesting about our approach to the Anteater virtues. As you've mentioned, one goal was to embed it actually in classes. We have also made it part of the orientation process. Students have access to it. And we did it by really creating these modules. Do you want to talk a little bit about the flexibility and the advantage of the approach we took with the modules?
Yeah, so we have these, the idea of the modules is that in an ideal world, as you progress through your degree, you'll progress through the module. So in lower division, orientation, you get a sample, you get a taster. So right from the off, you're introduced just to what it is and why it's important. And then in lower division courses, or in your first couple of years at university, you'll take the foundation modules where you'll explore, what are the intellectual virtues, why are they relevant to education, what are the 4 Anteater virtues, how are they relevant. And I should stress, each module is both interdisciplinary and historical. Right. So we have a range of different people giving their disciplinary perspectives on this from across the campus. And we also have a historical perspective usually. Like, we'll look at people from history, like, how did Newton manifest, how did Marie Curie manifest intellectual tenacity and so on. And then after that, there are the advanced modules. And they obviously advance, they build on the introductory ones, and they take specific topics, maybe like wisdom or intellectual vice, or as I said, we're going to do a new one on intellectual virtue and AI. Right. We're going to do one on the scholarly values, because that's the campus-wide theme for this year. Right. So these advanced modules are a bit more demanding. They're designed to be taken really with upper division courses or in your last 2 years. And then what's about to launch this year are the capstone projects, the capstone modules. So the thought is that if students want to, they can go right the way through. The capstone modules will be paired with an independent study, and there'll be like some project that they do. And if they complete the whole thing, then we're going to come up with some certification for them. So they get something that says that you've done the whole thing, but you don't have to do the whole thing. Sometimes I get emails from students, they've tried to do the whole thing at once, and they're like really daunted by you don't do that. That's not, the idea is what we're trying to give students is a way to conceptualize their learning, so they can think of it in broader terms. Like what we're doing here is not just teaching you chemistry or engineering or whatever. We're trying to cultivate your intellectual character. And what's really important about this is that, you know, a lot of the things you learn will be lost. I mean, it's a sad fact about education.
No,
you learn
it's so true.
And in fact, some of the people who've pioneered the study of this are actually at UCI. Richard Arron is one of my collaborators on this project, has talked about how a lot of these educational outcomes, they're lost. But development of character isn't lost. That's what's really interesting. And that's the kind of thing that's going to stand you in good stead, whatever you do in your life. Moreover, and here's the other good thing, it's not just a long-term benefit. I mean, we're doing an empirical study of this. In fact, Richard Arron, I just mentioned, they've got this big database measuring educational outcomes. This has a direct, measurable, positive effect on educational outcomes. So if you do the Anteater virtues, we can show you perform better, you learn better.
And I think that's exciting. And the other quick thing on this, before I talk about where we're going with it, is with the modules, faculty can just introduce this into their classes where they want, right? Because it's very flexible for that.
Yeah.
So we'll do a brief ad. Faculty should, look out, pick these modules, put them in their classes where they work.
So that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to, as you say, with DTI, we've been embedding it in faculty training and graduate teaching assistant training to get faculty aware of this resource and how they can use it. Like just build it in as an extra credit or something like that. Maybe think about how, because I think a lot of people are here, they do care about pedagogy, right? They care about I'd also say as well, we haven't studied this yet, we're going to study it soon. We think there's a measurable effect on student welfare, actually. Yeah. We think that, students thinking about their education in this way, I mean, a lot of students say this to me, they feel better about their education. This instrumental way of thinking about education is not good.
No,
it's not good for their mental health.
I definitely think this is a lower stress way. And this leads naturally to some of the future directions. I'm going to start with a random side future direction. When we started this, I think there was partly the long-term goal, and this year is really going to help, of these aren't just virtues for students. The Anteater virtues are virtues for the UC Irvine community as a whole, right? There's something faculty should be embracing, staff should be embracing. We should think of UC Irvine community from this perspective, and I think this is where the 4 we picked work well in the whole approach of a university, not just in the classroom. Yeah. So maybe just say a few words. We are going to have the year of scholarly virtues. This video is going to last forever. People are going to watch this 15 years in the future where that part may not be so relevant. But let's comment briefly on, how do we start moving this to the whole community?
I think it's really important. And I think what we would say to faculty is that it's not like we're telling you to change anything. I think good educators already do the things we're doing. It's just that they don't necessarily have the conceptual framework. They don't think of it in that conceptual framework. I mean, good educators will be intellectual exemplars, scholarly exemplars. They will demonstrate that. I mean, think of the people that you admire as colleagues. As, I think of a friend of mine in my field, epistemology. He's must be late 80s now, and he's such a wise figure.
Right.
And he's so interested, even now, he knows everything. There's no objection he hasn't heard before, but he's always interested. He wants to learn more about why you think that. So he exhibits these qualities. And I think when we look around and we think the people that we admire as colleagues, we can see that they have these qualities. We might not have ever thought of them as virtues, intellectual virtues or Anteater virtues, but they are. That's what's there. And I think if we can conceptualize it in those terms, it actually enhances what we're doing, because it gives us a framework to think about, why is this good? Why do we do this? Why do we think this is important? And I think embedding that into the university is a good thing. We've started doing some subject areas thinking about educational outcomes. We already have this dry language,
right? Yeah.
But maybe make it more richer language. We're trying to foster these particular traits, and that's what we're all trying to do. What we want for our students. We don't just want them to, learn X.
Right.
We want them to be better people, to develop their character.
So in a dream world, as we move forward, what do you kind of see as the future of this, Duncan? What would be super exciting?
Well, I hope. The hope is that UCI, this becomes just so much part of the culture that we don't even think about it.
Right.
That would be wonderful. And I think we're kind of getting to a tipping point. I feel that now, because thousands of students have done it. Many faculty have gone through the training. We actually have a training module now. We developed online. So faculty can sign up for the modules, just as students can, right, if they're interested. And they can also, if they look down the modules, so the students can do the training module too. The training module is, what is it to educate for intellectual virtue, and how do you go about it, like practical tips. And I would hope, lots of people would do that, and they would see, this is kind of like, it gives me a way of thinking about what I do and why it's important, So that was the dream for UCI. But then the next step is influencing the world. Right?
Yeah. Well, as I said, this podcast is for the world.
I mean, so as I said, in schools and prisons, this has been done. It's never been done in university before, and we've got this project is grounded in theoretical and empirical work, and it's producing, because we're researchers, it's producing new theoretical and empirical work, and the empirical results have been great. I mean, we've got this longitudinal study, and we're churning out these papers, and each time it's confirming. I mean, what's interesting about this is whenever you do an intervention, you usually get some positive effects because it's an intervention.
Right, and you're doing something new, and you're designing, right,
But what you really want is an intervention where the positive effects are stable across groups. Right. It doesn't, it's not like the people coming into it who are doing well, it usually happens. People who are already doing well get the most benefit.
Right.
People who are poorly get the least benefit.
Right.
But what we find is we get very stable effects. It's not influenced by, because we can track all this stuff. We know people's backgrounds, we know the demographics and so on. And we're getting positive and stable effects. And they're lasting effects as well. They're still there 12 months later and so on. And so what we want to do is make the case for other universities to do this, to follow us. Like we want to be a beacon.
Yeah.
UCI is a beacon of pedagogical innovation, which shows what can be done. That this can actually be done in an R1 curriculum. And the modules now are publicly available. So we have a UCI version. We also have a public version. Yeah. And we've partnered with various institutions, and they're across the world, like places like Argentina and Australia and so on, and they're trying out our modules. So they're taking the Anteater virtues. So we're starting to spread around the world, and we're linking to other things as well, like schools. Tomorrow I'm going to the Discovery Cube. They've got a new exhibit, which I've given on intellectual virtues. I'm going to see it for the first time tomorrow.
Well, that's
which
awesome.
I gave advice on. Told them about this, and then they use it in there.
Well, and I think what's great about it, among all the other things you've said, there's also just this piece that if we take the time to be explicit about something, right, it can bring students in and give them a framework. And I think we often forget that we were sort of, as faculty, we were the students who came, maybe we wouldn't have described it in these exact terms, but we were at least fairly aware of these virtues at some level, and we embraced them without having to be explicitly named. Yeah. And I think this broadens that experience by explicitly naming it, and then we get all these benefits. It's very exciting. Yeah,
exactly. I think this is the advantage of doing it at higher education level. Like if you do this in schools, you don't want to be too explicit about the conceptual stuff. Right. That kind of distracts,
Right.
But at higher education level, you can do it and also be explicit about the conceptual stuff, right? Because people are ready to learn that, Yeah. And I think that the results seem to show that actually enhances the positive educational effects of doing that.
Well, this is awesome, Duncan. Thank you for taking the time to sit here and talk about this. I'm excited for the upcoming year, or if you're watching this way in the future, the past year that was incredibly successful, trust me. But great to have you here, and thank you all for watching and listening, and see you on future Conversations with the Vice Provost.